Did you know the average office worker today has a grip strength lower than most women from the 1980s? We sit in chairs. So we drive cars, we look at screens. Our bodies are soft. But what if our daily life was our workout? Not an hour at the gym, the whole day. That was the reality for people in the Middle Ages. They didn't have fitness routines. They had survival routines. Their fitness was a byproduct of their existence. It was baked into everything they did. From a knight hauling 70 pounds of steel to a peasant swinging a scythe from sunup to sundown, their strength was real. It was functional. It was natural. So what happened to it? Have we engineered the hardness out of our lives? And what can we learn from these forgotten ways of moving, of working, of living? We think we are advanced, but maybe in some ways we've gone backward. Number 19, could a game of kicking a pig's bladder make you a better athlete? We think of football as a sport with rules, referees, white lines on a green field. But it wasn't always like that. Long before the Premier League, there was mob football. The name tells you a lot. It was a chaotic, sprawling, and often violent game played in medieval England. Sometimes it was called Shrovetide football, played on Shrove Tuesday as a kind of final wild celebration before Lent. The goals could be miles apart. The itch was the entire town or the space between two villages. There were no real limits on the number of players. It could be dozens. It could be hundreds. The objective was simple. Get an inflated pig's bladder or a leather ball stuffed with cork to the other team's goal. The goal might be a specific tree, a church door, or a mill. How you got it. There was up to you. You could kick it, carry it, throw it, and you could do almost anything to stop the other team. The physical demands were immense. This was not a game of skill and finesse. It was a test of raw primal fitness. Imagine running for hours over uneven ground. You're dodging people. You're tackling them. You're wrestling for the ball. It's a full body workout that never stops. The cardio was brutal. Your heart and lungs would be pushed to their absolute limit. But it was also about strength. You needed powerful legs to run through mud and up hills. You needed a strong core to stay on your feet when someone slammed into you. You needed upper body strength to push, pull, and grapple your way through the crowd. This was high-intensity interval training, but the intervals lasted for hours. The game was so rough that rulers tried to ban it. King Edward II banned it in London in 1314 because the great noise in the city was causing a panic. King Henry VIII reportedly had a pair of football boots made in 1526, so he must have played, but he also passed laws limiting the game to private land. The authorities saw it as a public nuisance and a cause of riots. They were probably right. Historians like Montague Shearman in his 1887 book Athletics and Football documented the raw nature of these early games. He described them as a friendly fight between whole villages. The lack of rules meant that injuries were common. Broken bones, sprains, and bruises were just part of the game. But this constant, chaotic movement built a type of resilience we rarely see today. It trained the body to be adaptable, to absorb impact, and to keep going when exhausted. It was a scramble for survival disguised as a game. You couldn't just be a good runner or a strong wrestler. You had to be both at the same time while thinking on your feet. Modern sports are specialized. A marathon runner trains for endurance. A powerlifter trains for strength. A mob football player trained for everything, all at once. So, what are the shocking questions we're left with? If our modern, rule-bound sports create specialized athletes, did these chaotic medieval games create a more complete, all-around human athlete? Could the very lack of rules have been a superior training method for real-world physical challenges? And in our effort to make sports safer and more civilized, have we accidentally stripped them of their ability to build true, rugged resilience? Number 18 was a blacksmith's hammer, the original kettlebell. Before gyms had rows of dumbbells and kettlebells, there was the blacksmith's forge. It was hot, it was loud, and it was the site of one of the most demanding physical jobs of the medieval period. The blacksmith was a vital part of any community. They made everything from nails and horseshoes to swords and armor. And the main tool of their trade was the hammer. This wasn't a small claw hammer for tapping in nails. We're talking about sledgehammers, cross peens, and rounding hammers. They could weigh anywhere from a few pounds to over 20. And a blacksmith would swing one for hours a day, day after day. Think about the movement. It's not just an arm workout. A proper hammer swing is a full-body explosion. The power starts in the legs, drives up through the hips and core, and is then transferred through the shoulder and arm into the hammer. It's a rotational, powerful, and highly coordinated movement. It's very similar to a modern kettlebell swing or a sledgehammer slam on a tire. But a blacksmith didn't do 10 reps and then rest. They did thousands of reps. This built a unique kind of fitness. They had incredible explosive power. They needed it to shape hot metal. They also had incredible muscular endurance. Their bodies had to sustain that power output all day long. Their grip strength would have been immense. Holding onto a heavy vibrating hammer handle for hours would build hands like vises. The work was also asymmetrical. A blacksmith was typically right-handed or left-handed. They would swing the hammer with their dominant arm while holding the tongs to manipulate the metal with their other. This would lead to an unbalanced physical development. You can see this in skeletal remains. Archaeologists who study medieval skeletons can often identify a blacksmith by the bone density and muscle attachment points on their dominant arm and shoulder. They are significantly larger and more robust. A study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science examined skeletons from a medieval Danish village and found clear evidence of this occupational stress. The bones of one arm were thicker and showed signs of powerful muscle attachments, a classic sign of a blacksmith or someone doing similar heavy, one-sided labor. This is something we actively avoid in modern fitness. We strive for balance and symmetry. A blacksmith's body was a specialist tool shaped by its function. The forge itself added another layer of physical stress. The intense heat would have been a constant cardiovascular challenge. It was like working out in a sauna. They would have been constantly sweating, needing to stay hydrated. The physical demands were so great that blacksmiths were often depicted as powerful, muscular figures in medieval art and literature. Think of Wayland the Smith from Norse mythology, a figure of legendary strength and skill. This wasn't just a fantasy, it was a reflection of reality. To be a blacksmith, you had to be strong. The job itself was the training. So what are the unanswered questions here? Did blacksmiths have a shorter life expectancy due to the extreme asymmetrical strain on their bodies, or did the work actually make their hearts and bones stronger? What kind of chronic injuries did they suffer from, and were there folk remedies or specific stretches they used to manage the pain of their unbalanced work? And could modern athletes learn something from this kind of asymmetrical training, or is it a blueprint for eventual breakdown? Number 17, did a fuller's stomp build stronger legs than any squat rack? The medieval textile industry was a huge part of the economy, but before fine cloth could be made, raw wool had to be cleaned and thickened. This process was called fulling, and the person who did it was a fuller. It was grueling, repetitive, and incredibly physical work. After wool was woven, it was still oily, dirty, and loose. To fix this, it was put into a large vat filled with water and a cleaning agent. Often, this cleaning agent was stale urine collected from households in the town. Sometimes it was a type of clay called fuller's earth. The job of the fuller was to agitate this mixture for hours on end. How did they do it? They stomped on it. For hours, barefoot in a vat of wool, water, and urine, a fuller would walk in place, tread, and stomp to pound the dirt and oil out of the fabric. This constant movement also matted the wool fibers together, making the cloth thicker and more compact. It was essentially a low-impact, high-duration leg workout. Think of it like spending your entire day on a Stairmaster, but with the added resistance of wet, heavy wool under your feet. It would build incredible endurance in the calves, quads, and glutes. The constant need to balance in the slippery vat would also strengthen all the small stabilizing muscles in the feet, ankles, and core. Later in the Middle Ages, around the 12th century, the process was mechanized with the invention of the fulling mill. These mills used water wheels to power large wooden hammers that would pound the cloth. But in many places, especially in the earlier medieval period or in areas without fast-flowing rivers, fulling was still done by foot. It was considered an unskilled and unpleasant job. The smell alone would have been overwhelming. But the physical benefits, though unintended, were significant. We often focus on the strength of knights and blacksmiths, but the endurance of the common laborer, like the fuller, was just as impressive. Their fitness was built not through explosive power, but through relentless, steady effort. Their bodies were adapted to simply not quit. Records from medieval guilds give us a glimpse into their lives. Fullers' guilds were common in cloth-producing areas like Flanders and England. These records talk about work hours, disputes, and the physical toll of the job. There's no direct mention of their fitness, because that concept didn't exist. But the descriptions of the work itself tell the story. In the book, The Medieval Tailor's Assistant by Sarah Thursfield, she details the entire process of cloth making, and the sheer physicality of the fulling stage is clear. It was human-powered machinery. A person's legs and lungs were the engine of the process. This kind of work builds a different kind of body. Not the bulging muscles of a bodybuilder, but the lean, dense, and tireless muscles of an ultra-marathon runner. This leaves us with some curious thoughts. We focus on high-intensity, short-duration exercise today, but did the slow, steady, all-day work of a fuller build a more robust and sustainable kind of cardiovascular health? What was the long-term effect on their joints, stomping in a vat for 8 to 10 hours a day? Was it destructive, or did the low-impact nature of the work actually protect them? And is there a forgotten benefit to these kinds of endurance-based, repetitive movements that our modern fitness routines are completely missing? Number 16 was carrying water, the ultimate functional fitness routine. Before you could turn a tap and get clean water, you had to go get it every single day. This task, which we now take for granted, was a fundamental part of medieval life. And it was a serious workout. Water is heavy. A gallon of water weighs about 8.3 pounds. A typical medieval household would need many gallons a day for drinking, cooking, and washing. This water had to be hauled from a river, a well, or a town fountain and carried back to the house. This job often fell to women and children. The methods varied. The simplest way was to carry 2 buckets, one in each hand. This is a classic loaded carry, similar to a modern farmer's walk. It's a fantastic full-body exercise. Builds a powerful grip, strong shoulders, and traps a rock-solid core and sturdy legs. You have to walk, often for a considerable distance, while keeping your torso upright and stable under load. But a more efficient method was the yoke. This was a wooden pole carried across the shoulders with a bucket suspended from each end by a rope or chain. The yoke distributed the weight more evenly, allowing a person to carry a much heavier load for a longer distance. But it came with its own physical demands. The weight pressed down directly on the spine and shoulders. It required immense core and back strength to walk with a heavy sloshing yoke without stumbling or injuring yourself. We can see this in medieval art. Illuminated manuscripts and woodcuts frequently show people, especially women, carrying water with yokes or buckets. It was such a common sight that it was just part of the background of daily life. Skeletal evidence supports this. Archaeologists can identify signs of habitual load-bearing on the spine and shoulder girdles of medieval skeletons. For example, analysis of skeletons from the medieval St. Mary Magdalene Leper Hospital in Winchester, England, showed significant vertebral changes, indicating that the inhabitants, despite their illness, were still involved in heavy physical labor, likely including carrying water and other supplies. Their bodies were a record of their daily struggle. This wasn't a choice, it wasn't exercise, it was a non-negotiable part of survival. This daily routine built a type of strength that is incredibly practical. It's the strength to move heavy, awkward objects over a distance. It's what we now call functional fitness. Modern gyms try to replicate this with exercises like farmer's walks, yoke carries, and sandbag carries. But for medieval people, it wasn't a simulation, it was the real thing. They didn't need to train for life. Life was the training. The constant trips to the well, day in and day out, from childhood to old age, would have forged bodies that were incredibly strong and resilient in a way that is hard for us to imagine. It was a slow, grinding, but highly effective way to build a foundation of real-world strength. But what are the hidden questions about this routine? Did this constant spinal loading lead to widespread chronic back pain and disability, or did it build spines that were stronger and more resistant to injury than ours? Were there special techniques or ways of walking with a yoke passed down from mother to daughter that maximized efficiency and minimized injury? And if we stopped all our complex gym routines and just spent 30 minutes a day doing farmer's walks, would we be healthier and stronger in a more practical way? Number 15, did monks have a secret fitness program? When we think of medieval monks, we often picture them praying, chanting, or quietly copying manuscripts. But there was another, much more physical side to monastic life. The guiding principle for many monastic orders was the rule of Saint Benedict, written around the year 530. A key part of this rule was the Latin phrase ora et labora, which means pray and work. Saint Benedict believed that idle hands were the devil's workshop, so a monk's day was strictly divided between prayer, study, and manual labor, and that labor was often very demanding. Monasteries were self-sufficient communities. They had to produce their own food, maintain their own buildings, and manage their own land. This meant that monks were farmers, gardeners, stonemasons, carpenters, and brewers. They would spend several hours every day engaged in hard physical work. They tilled the fields with heavy plows. They harvested crops with scythes and sickles. They tended to vegetable gardens and orchards, and they repaired the stone walls of the monastery. This wasn't just about getting chores done. It was seen as a spiritual practice, a way to humble the body and focus the mind. The 12th century Cistercian order was particularly known for its emphasis on manual labor. They chose to build their monasteries in remote, wild areas and worked the land themselves, becoming highly successful farmers and land managers. The variety of the work was a key part of its physical benefit. One day a monk might be doing the heavy rotational work of scything. The next, he might be doing the careful detailed work of pruning fruit trees, which would involve reaching, balancing, and climbing. Then he might be part of a team lifting heavy stones to repair a wall, a classic strength training exercise. This constant variety would have built a well-rounded functional fitness. It wasn't specialized. It was a general physical preparedness built from the necessities of their life. Their diet, often simple and vegetarian, combined with this regular, varied physical work, likely made many monks very healthy and strong. The historical records of monasteries, known as cartularies, give us details about their landholdings and economic activities. They show us the scale of the agricultural work they were undertaking. We also have archaeological evidence from the excavation of monastery sites, which reveals the tools they used and the layout of their farms and workshops. In books like The Stripping of the Altars by Eamon Duffy described the daily rhythms of pre-Reformation life, where the work of the monastery was deeply integrated into the life of the surrounding community. The monks were not just spiritual figures, they were also a physical, working part of the landscape. This leaves us with some intriguing questions. Was the combination of manual labor, a simple diet, and a structured, low-stress life a recipe for exceptional health and longevity that we've completely forgotten? Did the spiritual dimension of the work, seeing it as a form of prayer, change the body's response to the physical stress? And are there lost monastic techniques for farming or building that were not only efficient, but also ergonomically superior to our modern methods? Poll number 14, could a woodsman's axe swing be a perfect full body exercise? Wood was the primary fuel and building material of the Middle Ages, and getting that wood was hard, dangerous work. The woodsman or woodcutter was a common figure responsible for felling trees and chopping them into usable logs and firewood. Their primary tool was the axe, and the act of swinging an axe all day is one of the most comprehensive workouts imaginable. It's a raw display of power, coordination, and endurance. Let's break down the movement of felling a tree with an axe. It's a powerful, explosive motion that engages the entire body, like a blacksmith's hammer swing. The power originates in the feet and legs. You drive force from the ground, through your hips and core, up your back, and into your shoulders and arms. It's a massive rotational movement that heavily involves the obliques and lower back. It requires precision and timing. You have to hit the same spot again and again to create the cut. This combination of raw power and fine motor control builds a unique kind of athletic ability. It's not just brute strength, it's coordinated functional strength, and then there's the endurance. A woodsman didn't just swing an axe a few times, they did it for hours. This built incredible muscular and cardiovascular stamina. After the tree was down, the work wasn't over. The logs had to be split. Splitting a log with a splitting maul or a wedge and sledgehammer is another brutally effective exercise. It's a vertical chopping motion that heavily taxes the lats, shoulders, and core. And then all this wood had to be carried or dragged out of the forest. This meant more loaded carries, lifting, and pulling. The entire job, from start to finish, was a non-stop, full body workout. The grip strength required to control an axe for hours would be phenomenal. Their hands would be tough and callous, their forearms like steel cables. We can find depictions of woodcutters in medieval art, like the famous Bayeux Tapestry, which shows men felling trees to build ships for William the Conqueror's invasion of England in 1066. These images show the simple, powerful tools they used and the physicality of the work. The study of medieval tools found at archaeological sites also tells a story. The design of their axes was refined over centuries to be as efficient as possible. But even with the best tool, the engine was still human muscle. The book A History of the English-Speaking Peoples by Winston Churchill, while broad in scope, paints a picture of a pre-industrial world powered by muscle, where tasks like cutting wood were a fundamental part of the economy and survival. So, what are the unanswered mysteries of the woodsman's fitness? Did they develop specific techniques for swinging an axe that maximize power and minimize the risk of injury? Techniques that are now lost to us. Given the incredible strain on the spine, were they prone to debilitating back injuries, or did the work forge backs that were incredibly strong and resilient? And in a world without foam rollers and physical therapists, what did they do for recovery after a long day of swinging an axe? Number 13 was the archer's draw, the secret to upper body strength. The longbow was the superweapon of the late Middle Ages. In the hands of a skilled English or Welsh archer, it was a deadly, rapid-fire weapon that could dominate a battlefield. But to use one effectively required a level of physical strength that is almost unimaginable today. The medieval warbow was not a modern sporting bow. It had a draw weight of anywhere from 100 to over 180 pounds. To put that in perspective, a typical modern hunting bow has a draw weight of around 60 to 70 pounds. A medieval archer was pulling back a weight equivalent to a heavy person with one arm over and over again. The training to become a longbowman was long and arduous. It had to start in childhood. In England, laws were passed to encourage archery practice. A 1252 law from King Henry III required every man with a certain amount of land to own a bow and arrow. The yeoman archers, who were a key part of English armies, were a product of this culture. They practiced constantly from a young age. This lifetime of training fundamentally changed their bodies. The act of drawing a heavy bow is a massive upper body exercise. It involves the large muscles of the backs, the lats and rhomboid sites, as well as the shoulders, chest, and arms. It's a pulling motion that requires not just strength, but also stability and control. We have dramatic physical evidence for this. Skeletons recovered from the wreck of the Mary Rose, a ship of King Henry VIII that sank in 1545, provide a stunning snapshot. Many of the skeletons believed to be archers show significant physical changes. Their left arms, the one holding the bow, were often larger and more robust. But the most striking feature was in their shoulders and spines. The muscle attachment points on their right shoulder blades and along their spines were massively enlarged, a direct result of the incredible forces involved in drawing the bow. Some even had stress fractures in their vertebrae. Their skeletons are a silent testament to the brutal demands of their profession. A study led by the Swansea University College of Engineering even used computer modeling to analyze the skeletons and concluded that the physical stress was so great, it was at the limits of what the human skeleton can take. This wasn't just about strength, it was also about endurance. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, English archers fired storms of arrows, perhaps as many as 10 to 12 arrows per minute. To maintain that rate of fire, even for a short period with such a heavy bow, would require incredible muscular endurance. They were not just strong, they were tireless, their fitness was highly specialized, a direct result of thousands of hours of practicing a single, powerful movement. They had built their bodies into human weapons platforms. But this raises some troubling questions. What was the long-term cost of this kind of extreme, asymmetrical training? Did these archers live with constant debilitating pain in their shoulders and back? Once they were too old to be effective in battle, were their bodies too broken for other kinds of work? And is there any modern, safe way to replicate the back-strengthening benefits of the archer's draw without destroying our joints in the process? So number 12, could a stonemason's work build a better body than a modern gym? The great cathedrals and castles of the Middle Ages are monuments to faith, power, and ambition. They are also monuments to human labor. These incredible structures were built by hand, by skilled craftsmen called stonemasons, and the physical demands of their job were extraordinary. They were, in a very real sense, professional strength athletes. Their work involved every fundamental human movement: lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, and squatting. The entire process was a workout. First, the stone had to be quarried. This involved using wedges, hammers, and levers to break massive blocks of stone free from the earth. This was heavy, explosive work. Then these blocks, weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds, had to be moved. They used rollers, sledges, and rudimentary cranes, but it still required immense human force to get them from the quarry to the building site. Once at the site, the masons had to shape the stones. This involved hours of chipping away with a chisel and mallet, a repetitive task that built powerful shoulders, arms, and a strong grip. Finally, the shaped stones had to be lifted into place. They used hoists and scaffolding, but much of the work still relied on muscle. Imagine being part of a team, using ropes and your own strength, to position a multi-hundred-pound stone block high on a cathedral wall. This was functional, full body strength training at its most raw. A stonemason's body would have been a direct reflection of his work. He would have had a tremendously strong back, legs, and core from the constant lifting and carrying. His shoulders and arms would be powerful from swinging a mallet. His hands and forearms would be like iron from gripping tools and stones. There was no leg day or arm day. Every day was full body day. The work required not just brute strength, but also skill, balance, and a deep understanding of leverage. A good mason knew how to use his body intelligently to move immense weight safely. We can see the evidence in the buildings themselves. The sheer scale of a structure like Chartres Cathedral in France or Lincoln Cathedral in England is staggering when you consider the technology they had. It was built with human power. The guilds that stonemasons belonged to had strict rules and long apprenticeships. An apprentice would learn the trade over many years, his body slowly adapting to the incredible physical demands. In Jean Gimpel's book, The Cathedral Builders, he details the organization and techniques of these medieval craftsmen. He describes a world where engineering and hard labor were inseparable. The mind that designed the arch was connected to the body that lifted the stone. This leads to some fundamental questions about our approach to fitness. We isolate muscles in the gym, but a stonemason's work integrated them. Was their method of building strength through complex, real-world tasks superior for creating overall health and resilience? What kind of injuries did they suffer, and what does that tell us about the limits of the human body when pushed to its absolute extreme every single day? And could the principles of their work lifting heavy, awkward objects with skill and intelligence be a better path to strength than simply lifting a perfectly balanced barbell? Number 11 was a peasant's scythe, the ultimate core exercise. For the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages, life was tied to the land. They were peasants, farmers who worked the fields from sunrise to sunset, and one of their most important tasks was harvesting grain and hay. The tool for this job was the scythe, and the rhythmic, powerful motion of scything was one of the most demanding physical activities of the era. It was a full-body workout that built a specific and highly functional kind of fitness, particularly in the core. The scythe is not an arm tool. A skilled mower generates power from the ground up. The motion is a graceful, sweeping twist. You stand with your feet wide, and as you swing the long blade, you rotate your entire torso. The power comes from your legs, hips, and obliques. Your arms are mostly just guiding the blade. It's a perfect rotational exercise, very similar to a wood chop with a cable machine or a Russian twist with a weight. But a peasant didn't do a set of 15 reps. They performed this movement thousands of times a day, for weeks on end during the harvest season. This built incredible strength and endurance in the core muscles, the obliques, the rectus abdominis, and the lower back. A strong core was not an aesthetic choice, it was a prerequisite for the job. This work was relentless. Manorial records from medieval England often specify the boon work a peasant owed to his lord. This might include mowing a certain number of acres of hay. An acre is a large area. To mow it by hand with a scythe is a monumental task. The cardiovascular demands would have been huge. It was a steady-state cardio workout that lasted all day. The constant swinging, combined with walking across the field, would have built a heart and lungs of incredible capacity. We have vivid depictions of this work in medieval art, such as the famous illustrations in the Luttrell Psalter, a manuscript from the 1330s. It shows peasants in the fields, their bodies bent to the task, swinging their scythes in unison. The fitness gained from this was not for show. It was for survival. The harvest had to be brought in quickly before the weather turned. A family's food for the entire year depended on this work. This reality forged bodies that were lean, powerful, and incredibly resilient. They didn't have the bulk of a modern bodybuilder, but they had a sinewy, enduring strength that allowed them to perform hard physical labor all day, every day. The book, Life in a Medieval Village, by Francis and Joseph Guise, provides a detailed look at the daily routines of peasants, and the sheer amount of physical work they performed is a constant theme. But this raises some critical questions. The scything motion is very one-sided. Did this lead to severe muscle imbalances and spinal problems? Or did their bodies adapt in ways we don't understand? Were there specific folk stretches or movements they used at the end of the day to counteract the repetitive strain of their work? And if we were to incorporate a similar rotational, endurance-based movement into our modern fitness, would it be more effective at building a strong, functional core than all the crunches and planks we currently do? Number 10. Could a knight in armor outlast a modern athlete? The medieval knight is an icon of strength and power. Clad in a full suit of plate armor, he was the medieval equivalent of a tank. But we often forget what it took, physically, to be that tank. A full suit of steel plate armor in the 15th century could weigh anywhere from 50 to 70 pounds or even more. And it was custom fitted, designed to distribute the weight as evenly as possible across the body. But it was still a massive extra load to carry, and a knight didn't just stand around in it. He had to walk, run, mount a horse, and most importantly, fight in it. The physical conditioning required to do this was extreme. Just moving in armor was a full body workout. Every step, every movement was a form of resistance training. It was like wearing a weighted vest that covered your entire body. The cardiovascular demands were immense. Your heart and lungs had to work incredibly hard to supply oxygen to muscles that were already under a heavy load. A study published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B had modern subjects walk on a treadmill while wearing replica armor. They found that the energy cost was more than double that of walking without armor. The subjects were exhausted very quickly. A medieval knight had to be able to function under that kind of stress for hours. And then there was the fighting, swinging a sword or a mace, blocking a blow, wrestling with an opponent, all while wearing 60 pounds of steel. It required explosive power, muscular endurance, and incredible core strength to transfer force through the body while encased in metal. Training was constant and brutal. Knights practiced in tournaments or jousts, which were a form of military training disguised as sport. But their day-to-day training was just as important. They would practice with their weapons, wrestle, and engage in exercises designed to build the strength needed for battle. The 14th century writer Jean Froissart described knights training by vaulting onto horses in full armor, a feat that would require incredible leg and core power. We have their training manuals. Books like the Fechtbücher, fight books from Germany in the 15th and 16th centuries, don't just show weapon techniques. They show wrestling, grappling, and disarming an armored opponent. This tells us that knightly combat was not just about swinging swords, it was a full contact, full body struggle. Being strong wasn't enough. You had to be strong and have the stamina to keep fighting when you were completely exhausted and overheating inside your own personal steel oven. Historian and reenactor Dr. Tobias Capwell has spent years studying and wearing medieval armor. He has demonstrated that a well-made suit of armor allows for a surprising amount of mobility, but he emphasizes that the physical conditioning of the man inside it was the most critical factor. So, what are the shocking questions we are left with? Given the extreme cardiovascular stress, did knights have stronger hearts than modern endurance athletes, or were they constantly at risk of heart failure in the heat of battle? What did their recovery look like after a battle or a tournament? Did they have a sophisticated understanding of nutrition and rest, or did they simply rely on raw physical toughness? And if a prime medieval knight in full armor were to face a modern elite soldier in a test of endurance and functional strength, who would actually come out on top? Number 9. Were medieval wrestling grips the key to real-world strength? Long before the squared circle of professional wrestling or the mats of the Olympics, there was wrestling. In the Middle Ages, it was called Ringen in Germany and was a core part of martial training for knights, soldiers, and even commoners. It was not a sport with complex rules and a point system. It was a practical skill for self-defense and combat. And the training for it built a powerful, durable, and highly functional body. Medieval wrestling, as depicted in numerous Fechtbücher or combat manuals, was about controlling an opponent's body. The goal was to break their posture, unbalance them, and throw them to the ground. Once on the ground, the fight continued with joint locks, chokes, and pins. This required a huge amount of full body strength. A wrestler's power comes from the legs and hips, transferred through a rigid core. Every throw, every takedown is an explosive, coordinated movement of the entire body. It's the ultimate functional exercise. There are no isolation movements in wrestling. Every muscle has to work together. But the most unique aspect was the emphasis on grip. The German manuals show an incredible variety of grips on the wrists, the elbows, the neck, the clothing. A wrestler had to have a crushing grip to control his opponent, but he also needed endurance in his hands and forearms to maintain that grip while his opponent was struggling. Training would have involved countless hours of gripping, pulling, and twisting against a resisting partner. This built a kind of strength that is very different from lifting a barbell. It's an active, adaptive strength. Your muscles have to react instantly to the unpredictable movements of another person. This builds not just muscle, but also a powerful connection between the mind and the body. The famous 15th century German fight master Hans Talhofer included extensive sections on ringen in his manuals. His illustrations show men in dynamic, athletic positions, executing powerful throws and complex joint locks. This was not a clumsy brawl. It was a sophisticated martial art. It was practiced by all levels of society. Knights practiced it as a foundation for armored combat. If you lost your weapon, you had to fight hand to hand. Commoners practiced it for self-defense and as a popular sport at fairs and festivals. The physical conditioning it provided was immense. It built strong backs, powerful legs, a stable core, and that all-important, unbreakable grip. This leaves us to wonder about some things. Our modern fitness is often solitary lifting weights, running on a treadmill. Did the medieval practice of wrestling, which is always done with a partner, build a kind of reactive, intelligent strength that we are now losing? What were the most common injuries in medieval wrestling, and did they have methods for treating them that didn't involve modern surgery? And if you took a modern strength athlete and put them on a mat with a medieval wrestler of the same size, would the modern athlete's raw power be enough to overcome the wrestler's superior grip and leverage? Number 8 was the sailor's climb, a better workout than any pull-up bar. The age of discovery was powered by wind, but the ships were worked by muscle. A medieval sailing ship like a cog or a hulk was a complex machine of ropes, wood, and canvas. And the men who operated them, the sailors, were a special breed of athlete. Their work required a unique combination of strength, agility, balance, and courage. And a central part of their job was climbing. They had to constantly scramble up the rigging, the network of ropes that supported the mast and controlled the sails parter, often in high winds and rough seas. This was not like climbing a ladder. The rope rigging was unstable. It would sway with the motion of the ship. A sailor had to climb high above the deck, sometimes over 100 feet, with nothing but a churning sea below. This was a workout for the entire body, but it was particularly demanding on the upper body and grip. Imagine doing dozens of pull-ups and rope climbs every single day. That was a sailor's reality. They developed incredible pulling strength in their backs and biceps. Their grip strength would have been legendary. Their lives literally depended on their ability to hold on. A slip meant certain death. But it wasn't just about strength, it also required incredible core stability and balance. To move around in the rigging, you had to constantly adjust your body to the ship's movement. This built a powerful reactive core. It also demanded agility and coordination. A sailor had to be nimble, able to move quickly and confidently from one rope to another high above the deck. The work was nonstop. In a storm, every man would be on deck or in the rigging, fighting to control the sails and keep the ship afloat. This was a test of endurance unlike any other. They worked in shifts, but in bad weather they might work to the point of complete exhaustion. We have historical accounts from the period that describe the harsh life of a sailor. The records of trading companies and naval expeditions detail the size of the crews and the nature of the work. Archaeological discoveries of medieval shipwrecks like the Newport ship found in Wales, which dates to the 15th century, show us the complexity of the rigging they had to manage. The physical toll was immense. Skeletons of medieval sailors often show signs of hard physical labor, strong muscle attachments, but also a high incidence of fractures and arthritis. It was a life that built a strong body, but also broke it down. Their fitness was a direct product of their dangerous and demanding environment. So, what are the lingering questions about the sailor's life? How did they train new sailors to climb the rigging? Was it a brutal sink or swim process, or was there a more structured method for building the necessary strength and confidence? In an age without modern nutritional science, how did they manage to fuel their bodies for such demanding work on a limited shipboard diet of salted meat and hardtack? And did the constant need for balance give them a superior sense of proprioception, the body's awareness of its position in spaceline that most modern humans lack? So number 7, could a messenger's run redefine our idea of endurance? Before email, before the telephone, before the postal service, there was the messenger. If a king needed to send a dispatch to a general, or a merchant needed to send an urgent order, they relied on a man who could run. And these were not short sprints. Medieval messengers and couriers often had to cover vast distances on foot as quickly as humanly possible. They were the original ultramarathon runners, but they didn't do it for sport. They did it because it was their job. The physical demands of this profession were staggering. A messenger had to have incredible cardiovascular endurance. They would run for hours, sometimes for days, to deliver their message. They traveled over rough roads or cross country in all kinds of weather. This was not running on a flat, predictable treadmill. It was running on uneven, challenging terrain, which would have built strong legs, stable ankles, and a powerful core. They had to be self-sufficient, carrying their own food and water, and navigating by landmarks and the sun. This added an element of strength and mental toughness to their endurance. They also had to be fast. The value of a message was often tied to how quickly it was delivered. There are historical accounts of incredible feats of endurance. For example, the Greek runner Phidippides is famously said to have run from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, to announce a victory. While this is an ancient example, the principle remained the same in the Middle Ages. The ability to cover long distances on foot at a sustained pace was a valuable military and commercial skill. Royal courts and wealthy merchant houses employed their own couriers. These runners were professional athletes, their bodies conditioned for one specific grueling task. We have records that hint at their abilities. For example, the Tarahumara people of Mexico, also known as the Raramuri, which means running people, have a long history of long-distance running. They were never a medieval European group, but their existence shows what the human body is capable of when running is a central part of the culture. They demonstrate how a life of running shapes the body and mind. It is likely that medieval messengers had a similar level of conditioning, born out of necessity. Their fitness was pure function. There was no wasted muscle. They would have been lean, wiry, and incredibly efficient runners, their bodies built to do one thing: go forward, relentlessly. The book Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, while focusing on the Tarahumara, explores this idea that humans are biomechanically designed for endurance running. Medieval messengers were a real-world example of this principle in action. This form of fitness raises some fascinating questions. What was the average lifespan of a professional medieval messenger? Did the constant high-impact nature of their work wear their bodies out at a young age, or did it make them incredibly healthy? Did they have specific running techniques or a particular type of footwear that made them more efficient and less prone to injury? And have we, in our modern world of cars and convenience, lost a fundamental human ability for long-distance travel on our own 2 feet? Number 6 was a shepherd's walk, the original low-intensity cardio. We often associate medieval fitness with intense, back-breaking labor, but there was another kind of physical conditioning that was just as important, and it was built on a much slower, steadier foundation. This was the fitness of the shepherd. A shepherd's job was not about explosive power. It was about constant, patient movement. They spent their entire day on their feet, walking and standing, guiding their flock over hills, through valleys, and across plains. This was the ultimate low-intensity, long-duration workout. A shepherd might walk for 10 or 12 hours a day, every day. This constant movement would have built incredible endurance. Their cardiovascular systems would have been highly efficient. Their legs would have been strong and resilient, accustomed to covering miles of uneven terrain. Walking on natural, varied surfaces is a great workout. It strengthens all the small stabilizing muscles in the feet and ankles, improving balance and proprioception. It's much more demanding than walking on a flat pavement or a treadmill. A shepherd's body would have been perfectly adapted to this kind of activity. They would have been lean, with a strong core and a steady, efficient gait. The work also had an element of strength. A shepherd had to protect the flock from predators like wolves. They carried a staff or a crook, which could be used as a weapon. They also had to be able to lift and carry lambs or sick sheep. But the defining characteristic of their fitness was stamina. It was the ability to just keep going day after day in all weather. This kind of lifestyle fosters a deep underlying resilience that is very different from the peak fitness of a knight or a sprinter. It's a sustainable, lifelong fitness. This way of life is ancient, and it has changed very little over the centuries. We can see depictions of shepherds in religious art throughout the Middle Ages, always on their feet, always with their flock. Their role was essential. Wool was a hugely important commodity, and sheep provided both wool and meat. The health of the flock depended on the shepherd's constant vigilance and movement. Books that explore the history of agriculture, like the Agrarian History of England and Wales, describe the importance of sheep farming and the pastoral lifestyle. The shepherd was a figure of the landscape, as much a part of it as the hills and the sheep themselves. Their fitness was a quiet, unassuming byproduct of a life lived outdoors in constant, gentle motion. This makes us ask some important questions. In our modern obsession with high-intensity interval training height, have we forgotten the profound health benefits of simple, all-day, low-intensity movement like walking? Could the shepherd's lifestyle, with its constant walking and time spent in nature, be a better recipe for mental and physical well-being than an hour spent in a loud, crowded gym? And what was the long-term effect of this lifestyle on their joints? Did the constant gentle movement keep them healthy, or did it eventually wear them down? Number 5 was the plowman's push, the ultimate full body strength test. Before tractors, there was the plow, and before the plow could be pulled by horses or oxen, the land often had to be cleared by hand. But the most iconic image of medieval agriculture is the plowman, guiding a heavy wooden plow through the soil. This was a job that required immense, grinding, full body strength. It was a battle against the earth itself. The plows of the early Middle Ages were relatively light and were pulled by a team of oxen. But later, especially in the heavier soils of northern Europe, the heavy moldboard plow was introduced. This was a much bigger, more effective tool, but it was also much harder to manage. It was often pulled by a team of 8 oxen. The plowman's job was to walk behind this team, holding the 2 handles of the plow and steer it. This was not a passive activity. He had to use his own weight and strength to keep the plowshare cutting into the soil at the right depth. He had to fight against rocks, roots, and uneven ground. It was a constant, isometric, and dynamic struggle. Think about the muscles involved. The plowman had to push down and forward, engaging his chest, shoulders, and tricep. He had to keep his core braced and tight to control the plow's direction. His legs were constantly driving, pushing through the thick, muddy soil. It was like being in a scrum in a rugby match, but the match lasted all day. The grip strength required to hold onto the bucking plow handles would have been enormous. This was not about reps and sets. It was about sustained, maximum effort over a long period. It built a dense, powerful, and incredibly durable physique. This work was fundamental to survival. The plowing of the fields in spring was the first step in growing the grain that would feed the village for the year. Everyone's life depended on the plowman's strength and skill. We see this figure in countless medieval illustrations, like the Tres Riches du Duc de Berry, a famous illuminated manuscript from the 15th century. The calendar scenes show peasants at work in the fields in different seasons, and the plowman is a recurring figure, his body strained with effort. The poet William Langland, in his 14th century work Piers Plowman, uses the figure of the honest, hard-working plowman as a symbol of the virtuous common man. This was a recognition of the central and physically demanding role they played in society. This form of labor leaves us with some profound questions. We measure strength today by how much we can lift for one repetition. But was the plowman's ability to exert near maximal force for hours a more useful and impressive form of strength? What kind of diet did it take to fuel a body for this kind of work? And how did they get enough calories in a time of frequent food scarcity? And could we design a modern piece of gym equipment, like a weighted sled, to better replicate the unique, full-body resistance of pushing a plow through heavy soil? Number 4, could throwing stones be the best way to build explosive power? In an age before firearms, the ability to throw something with force and accuracy was a vital skill. And in the Middle Ages, one of the most common and accessible ways to practice this was by throwing stones. This wasn't just an idle pastime for children, it was a form of training, a display of strength, and a popular sport. And It was a fantastic way to build explosive, full body power. The act of throwing a heavy stone for distance is a complex athletic movement. It's very similar to the modern shot put. The power doesn't come from the arm alone. It starts in the legs, drives up through the hips, rotates through the core, and is then transferred through the shoulder and arm into the stone. It's a kinetic chain, a sequence of movements that generates incredible force. To do this effectively, you need powerful legs, a strong and stable core, and an explosive upper body. It's a perfect exercise for developing what athletes call rate of force development, the ability to generate strength quickly. Stone throwing was a common feature of medieval fairs and gatherings. Men would compete to see who could put the stone the farthest. This was a direct test of their strength and athletic ability. These competitions are the ancestor of the modern Highland Games events, like the stone put. But it also had a military application. At the siege of a castle, defenders on the walls would rain down rocks and other projectiles on the attackers below. And soldiers in the field, if they ran out of other weapons, could always find a rock. The Bible story of David and Goliath, a tale well known in the Middle Ages, was a powerful example of how a skilled stone thrower could defeat a much larger opponent. There are numerous historical references to these activities. The 12th century writer William Fitzstephen, in his description of London, mentions that young men would practice casting the stone in the fields outside the city. It was seen as a healthy and martial exercise. This was not a structured training program. It was just something that people did. They would find a suitable stone, find an open field, and compete with their friends. This informal, play-based approach to fitness is something we have largely lost. They built powerful athletic bodies not by following a routine, but by playing and competing. Their training was organic, driven by a natural desire to test their own strength. This simple activity raises some interesting questions. Is the complex, full-body coordination required for throwing a superior way to build functional power compared to the simple, linear movements we do in the gym, like the bench press? Did medieval people have a lower incidence of shoulder injuries, despite all the throwing, because they learned a more natural and efficient throwing motion from a young age? And could we improve the athleticism of young people today by reintroducing simple, playful competitions like stone throwing? Number 3 was a castle guard's patrol, the original weighted walk. The life of a castle guard or a town watchman was not one of constant heroic battle. For the most part, it was a life of routine vigilance and walking. But this was not a casual stroll. It was a form of low-intensity, long-duration, weighted exercise that would have built a solid foundation of functional fitness and endurance. And a guard on patrol would be on his feet for hours at a time, often for a long 12-hour shift. He would be constantly walking the battlements of a castle or the streets of a town, and he wouldn't be doing it in comfortable athletic wear. He would be wearing his equipment. This would typically include a leather or padded jacket called a gambeson, a steel helmet, and perhaps a mail shirt. He would also be carrying his weapons, a spear or a polearm, a sword, and a dagger. All told, this equipment could easily add 30 to 50 pounds of extra weight, so for his entire shift, he was performing a weighted walk, or what we now call rucking. This kind of exercise has profound benefits. It builds a strong back, core, and legs. It improves posture as you have to stand tall to support the load. It's also a fantastic cardiovascular workout, but it's low impact, so it's easier on the joints than running. The constant walking would build incredible stamina and resilience. A guard had to be ready for anything. He might have to stand alert for hours in the cold and rain, and then suddenly have to spring into action, running to sound an alarm or confronting an intruder. His fitness had to be a combination of endurance and readiness. The routine was monotonous, but the terrain was not. Walking on the uneven stone steps and walkways of a castle would challenge his balance and strengthen the small muscles in his ankles and feet. The routine was the training. There was no need to go to a gym. His job was his workout. We can get a sense of this life from historical sources like castle records, which detail the number of guards and the cost of their equipment. We can also learn from the architecture of the castles themselves. The long, winding staircases and extensive battlements were the guard's workplace and his training ground. In the book Life in a Medieval Castle by Joseph and Francis Geese, the daily routine of the castle inhabitants is described, and the constant presence of the guards walking their rounds is a key part of the castle's security and rhythm. This leaves us with some thought-provoking questions. Today, we see rucking as a specialized form of exercise, but for the medieval guard, it was just his job. Have we lost a simple, effective, and time-efficient form of fitness by separating our work from our physical activity? Could the combination of long-duration walking and the mental demands of vigilance create a unique mind-body connection that we are now missing? And if you took an average person today and had them walk for 8 hours with a 40-pound pack, would they be able to do it, or have our bodies become too deconditioned for this kind of basic functional endurance? Number two, did a swordsman solo? Drills, build a better mind, body connection. When we think of a medieval swordsman, we imagine two opponents locked in a dramatic duel. But the reality is that a huge amount of a swordsman's training was done alone. Just like a modern martial artist practicing a kata, medieval fighter would spend countless hours practicing solo drills. These were sequences of movements, footwork, strikes, and parries, all designed to build muscle memory and perfect his technique. And this practice was not just a physical workout, it was a deep form of mental and physical integration. The Etchbucher, or fight manuals, from masters like Fiore de Liberi in Italy and Joachim Meyer in Germany, provide a detailed look at these training methods. They don't just show techniques against an opponent, they describe stances, footwork, patterns, and basic cuts. A student would be expected to practice these fundamentals over and over again until they were second nature. This repetitive practice would build a specific kind of fitness. The constant movement, the lunging, the squatting would build strong legs and a stable core. The act of swinging a sword, which could weigh around 3 pounds but feels much heavier at the end of a long lever, would build powerful shoulders, forearms, and a strong grip. But the real benefit was in the coordination. A swordsman had to learn to move his entire body as a single, integrated unit. The power for a cut didn't come from the arm, it came from the rotation of the hips and the push from the feet. The solo drills were designed to teach this. It was about creating a perfect, efficient, and powerful movement. This is very different from a modern gym workout where we often isolate a single muscle. A swordsman's training was about connection, about making the entire body work together. It built a lean, athletic, and highly coordinated physique. This was not about building bulk, it was about building a body that could move with speed, power, and grace. This type of training also had a profound mental component. You had to be completely focused, completely present in the moment. It was a form of moving meditation. You were not just training your body, you were training your mind to control your body with precision and intent. The historical European martial arts HEMA community today has revived these practices. Practitioners spend hours doing these solo drills, and they can attest to the incredible physical and mental benefits. The writings of Miyamoto Musashi, a 17th century Japanese swordsman, in his Book of Five Rings, speak to the same universal principle that mastery of a weapon comes from relentless, mindful, solo practice. The principles were the same. Whether in Europe or Japan, this leads to some final, challenging questions. In our quest for bigger muscles, have we lost the art of building a body that can move with skill and efficiency? Could the deep focus required for solo weapon drills be a powerful antidote to our modern distracted minds? And is it possible that the greatest physical benefit of medieval martial training was not the strength it built, but the unbreakable link it forged between the mind and the body? Number one, what if survival was the only workout plan you ever needed? We have looked at 19 specific routines: the knight, the peasant, the blacksmith, the archer. But the most important and most forgotten medieval workout was not a single activity. It was the sum of all of them. It was the simple, unavoidable reality of their existence. Their workout plan was survival, and it was a full-time job. Think about a typical day. There were no cars. You walked everywhere. You walked to the fields, to the market, to the church. The average person in the Middle Ages likely walked several miles every single day, just as a matter of course. There was no central heating. In the winter, you were cold. Your body had to work harder just to stay warm, burning more calories. You chopped your own wood for the fire. You carried your own water from the well. You grew and harvested much of your own food. There were no supermarkets with prepackaged meals. Food production was hard physical labor. Even for a woman working in the home, the day was filled with physical tasks: kneading bread, churning butter, washing clothes by hand by beating them on a rock. Everything was harder. Everything required more physical effort. This constant low-level physical stress, punctuated by periods of intense, hard labor, created a different kind of human body. It was not a body designed in a gym. It was a body forged by the demands of the world. It was a body that was naturally strong, naturally resilient, and naturally fit. There was no concept of exercise as something you do for an hour a day. The entire day was the exercise. Their fitness was not a hobby, it was a non-negotiable part of being alive. This is a profound concept that we have almost completely lost. The evidence for this is written in their bones. Bioarchaeologists who study medieval skeletons consistently find evidence of a physically demanding lifestyle. They see robust bone growth and strong muscle attachment points, even on the skeletons of non-elite individuals. A study from the University of Cambridge compared the bones of medieval peasants with modern university students and found that the medieval bones were significantly stronger and denser, a direct result of their more active lives. They had the bone density of modern elite athletes, but it was the norm, not the exception. The book The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England by Ian Mortimer paints a vivid picture of this world, where the physical realities of life, the smells, the sounds, the constant effort, are at the forefront. And this brings us to the final and most shocking questions of all. By creating a world of convenience, have we accidentally declared war on our own bodies? Are our modern diseases, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, not diseases at all, but the natural and predictable result of a body that is living in an environment it was not designed for? And is it possible that the greatest health secret of the Middle Ages was not a specific workout or a special diet, but the simple, forgotten fact that their lives were hard and that hardness made them strong?